The morning sun was just breaking through the clouds when Daniel Chen pulled his car through the iron gates of Riverside Manor. At 28 years old, he'd made his fortune in technology, selling his startup for an amount that still didn't feel real. But unlike other young billionaires who collected sports cars and penthouse apartments, Daniel had always dreamed of something different. He wanted land, gardens, and a place where he could actually breathe. The estate was massive, sitting on 40 acres of rolling hills about 2 hours outside the city. The main house was a beautiful old stone building from the 1890s, but it was the gardens that had captured his heart the moment he saw the listing photos, or rather what the gardens used to be. Years of neglect had turned the once magnificent grounds into an overgrown wilderness. Still, Daniel could see the potential. He could imagine the hedges trimmed, the fountains flowing, and the rose gardens blooming again. As he stepped out of his car, Daniel noticed an old pickup truck parked near the greenhouse. A man in his early 60s was kneeling by one of the flower beds, pulling weeds with practiced hands. He wore faded jeans and a sun-bleached work shirt, and his brown skin was weathered from decades spent outdoors. Daniel walked over, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path. The man looked up, squinting against the sun. "You must be the new owner," the man said, standing up and brushing the dirt from his knees. His voice was warm but carried a hint of sadness. "I'm Roberto Morales. I've been taking care of this place for 33 years now. Well, trying to anyway." They shook hands, and Daniel felt the rough calluses that came from a lifetime of hard work. There was something instantly trustworthy about Roberto. Maybe it was the way he looked Daniel straight in the eye, or the genuine love Daniel could see when Roberto glanced around at the neglected gardens. "I was hoping you'd still be here," Daniel said. "The previous owner mentioned you in passing, said you were the only one who really knew these gardens." Roberto gave a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know every plant, every tree, every inch of soil on this property. Watched most of them grow from saplings or seeds. It's been hard watching it all fall apart these last few years. The previous owner, God rest him, he got too old to care and his children just wanted to sell." They walked together through the grounds, with Roberto pointing out what used to be where. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, even when talking about things that no longer existed. Daniel found himself liking this man more with each passing minute. "I want to restore everything," Daniel said as they stopped near an old fountain that had long since run dry. "I want to bring these gardens back to life. Actually, I've already signed a contract with a company to do the work." Roberto's expression changed instantly. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Which company?" Roberto asked quietly. "Premium Landscape Solutions," Daniel said, pulling out his phone to show Roberto the digital contract. "They came highly recommended. Very prestigious. They've done work for some of the biggest estates in the region." Roberto's jaw tightened. He took the phone from Daniel's hand and scrolled through the contract, his frown deepening with each swipe. When he finally handed it back, he looked Daniel dead in the eye. "Mr. Chen, I don't know you and you don't know me. You've got no reason to trust what I'm about to tell you, but I've lived in this area my whole life, and I've worked with every landscaping company within 100 miles. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Premium Landscape Solutions is going to rob you blind." Daniel felt his stomach drop. He'd done his research, or so he thought. Premium Landscape had a beautiful website, impressive portfolio photos, and glowing testimonials. Their CEO, Richard Vanderbilt, had seemed professional and knowledgeable during their meetings. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. Roberto pulled out his own phone, an older model with a cracked screen. He opened his photo gallery and began showing Daniel pictures. "You see this estate 3 miles down the road? Premium Landscape did their gardens 2 years ago. The owners paid $2.8 million. He swiped to another photo. This is what it looked like after they left. The image showed a disaster. Uneven paving stones, dying plants, and what looked like a half-finished water feature that had been abandoned mid-construction. The Hendersons next door. They hired Premium Landscape last year," Roberto continued, scrolling through more photos. "They were quoted $1.5 million. By the time Premium was done, they'd paid over $3 million. And look at this." The photos showed shoddy workmanship, mismatched materials, and designs that clearly didn't match what had been promised. "But how do they get away with it?" Daniel asked, feeling a cold knot forming in his chest. "It's their business model," Roberto explained. "They come in all charm and promises. They give you a reasonable quote, well, reasonable for wealthy folks anyway. Then once they start work, suddenly there are complications. The soil needs special treatment. The drainage is worse than expected. They need different materials than originally planned. Each time they present you with additional bills, and if you try to stop them or refuse to pay, they threaten to walk away and leave your property half destroyed. Most people just pay up because they're already in too deep. Daniel felt sick. He'd signed the contract 3 days ago. Premium Landscape was scheduled to start work next Monday. The contract total was $2.3 million, and he'd already transferred the first payment of $500,000 as a deposit. Why don't people sue them? Daniel asked. Roberto shook his head. They do, or they try to. But Premium Landscape has expensive lawyers, and somehow every case gets settled quietly. Non-disclosure agreements, I think they're called. The rich folks who get scammed just want to move on and forget about it. They're embarrassed. They don't want people knowing they got taken advantage of. How do you know all this? Daniel asked. Because I know the people who actually do the work, Roberto said. Premium Landscape doesn't do any of the actual labor themselves. They subcontract everything to local crews, small companies, independent workers. They pay these folks barely anything, maybe a quarter of what they're charging you, and pocket the rest. I know at least 6 different crews who've worked for Premium Landscape, and they all tell the same stories. Corners cut, cheap materials, rushed work, and if the workers complain, Premium just stops hiring them. Daniel sat down on the edge of the dry fountain, his mind racing. This was a disaster. He'd been so excited about the property, so eager to get started, that he'd rushed into the contract without doing enough due diligence. Now he was locked into an agreement with what sounded like professional con artists. The worst part, Roberto continued, sitting down beside him, is that Richard Vanderbilt knows exactly what he's doing. He targets people like you, young, successful, new money, people who have the wealth but maybe don't have the experience with this kind of thing yet. He's smooth, professional, makes you feel like you're getting the premium service. By the time you realize what's happening, you're in too deep. I signed the contract, Daniel said, more to himself than to Roberto. There's probably no way out of it without a massive legal battle. Roberto nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I just couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. These gardens, they deserve better. And honestly, you seem like a decent person. You didn't have to stop and talk to the old gardener. Most new owners would have just told me to clear out. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the birds singing in the overgrown trees. Despite the bad news, Daniel felt grateful. This man, who had no obligation to help him, who had everything to lose by speaking up, had just potentially saved him from a massive scam. Thank you for telling me, Daniel finally said. I need to think about this. But whatever happens, I'd like you to stay on. This property needs someone who actually cares about it. Roberto's face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. I'd be honored, Mr. Chen. Please call me Daniel. As Roberto headed back to his truck, promising to return the next day, Daniel sat alone by the fountain, staring at the contract on his phone. Premium Landscape Solutions was expecting him to be just another easy mark. Another wealthy young fool they could bleed dry. But what Richard Vanderbilt didn't know was that Daniel hadn't made his fortune by being careless. He'd built his company by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else, by seeing problems as opportunities, and by turning disadvantages into strategic advantages. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. He had an idea, and it was brilliant. Daniel spent that entire night in his home office, surrounded by 3 computer monitors and a pot of coffee that he kept refilling. Sleep could wait. Right now he needed information, and he needed it fast. Premium Landscape Solutions was supposed to start work in 5 days, and if he was going to do anything about this situation, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. He started with the basics: company registration, business licenses, corporate structure. Premium Landscape Solutions had been operating for 8 years. Richard Vanderbilt was listed as the founder and CEO. The company's official address was a prestigious office building downtown, the kind of place where rent alone probably cost more than most people's annual salary. But it was when Daniel started digging deeper that things got interesting. He had resources that most people didn't have. His tech company might have been sold, but he still had connections. Friends who owed him favors. People who were very good at finding information that others wanted to keep hidden. By 3 in the morning, Daniel had compiled a list of 17 lawsuits filed against Premium Landscape Solutions over the past 5 years. 17. And those were just the ones that had made it to court. Every single case had been settled out of court, and every settlement included a strict non-disclosure agreement. The people who'd been scammed weren't allowed to talk about it. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. This was worse than he'd thought. This wasn't just bad business practice. This was a well-oiled machine designed specifically to extract maximum money from wealthy clients while providing minimum value. The next morning, Daniel drove back to Riverside Manor. Roberto was already there, tending to some of the hardier plants that had managed to survive the years of neglect. The older man looked up as Daniel approached, concern evident in his eyes. "I did some research last night," Daniel said without preamble. "You were right. Premium Landscape has been doing this for years." Roberto nodded slowly, setting down his pruning shears. "What are you going to do?" "I need your help," Daniel said. "But first I need to talk to some people. Do you know anyone who's actually worked for Premium Landscape? The actual workers, not the company executives?" Roberto's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I know several. Small contractors, day laborers, craftsmen. Premium hires them for the actual work but pays them barely anything. Why? Because I need to understand exactly how they operate," Daniel explained. "Every detail. How they cut corners, what cheap materials they use, how they justify their cost overruns. Everything." Over the next 3 days, Roberto introduced Daniel to a network of local workers that he never would have found on his own. There was Carlos, a stonemason who'd worked on 2 Premium Landscape projects and quit in disgust over the quality of materials he was forced to use. There was Linda, who ran a small nursery and had supplied plants to Premium, only to watch them use the cheapest, most likely to die specimens instead of the healthy stock she'd recommended. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. Premium Landscape's strategy was sophisticated in its simplicity. They'd submit beautiful proposals with high-end materials and expert craftsmanship. Once the contract was signed and the deposit paid, they'd switch to the cheapest possible alternatives. Riverstones instead of quarried granite, garden center annuals instead of mature perennials, concrete pavers instead of natural stone. But the real genius of their scam was in the timing. They'd start with very visible, impressive work, maybe a beautiful entrance or a stunning focal point, something that made the client think they were getting their money's worth. Then, as the project progressed and the client was already invested both financially and emotionally, the complications would start appearing. Daniel took notes on everything. He recorded conversations with permission. He collected receipts, material lists, and project timelines. He built a comprehensive picture of exactly how Premium Landscape Solutions operated. Meanwhile, he had his lawyer review the contract he'd signed. The news wasn't good. The contract was ironclad. Breaking it would result in forfeiting his deposit and likely facing a lawsuit for breach of contract. Richard Vanderbilt's lawyers had clearly done this many times before. "So what do we do?" Roberto asked on the 4th day, as they sat in the manor's overgrown garden reviewing everything Daniel had learned. Daniel smiled. It was the same smile he'd had when he'd figured out the algorithm that had made his first company successful. The smile of someone who'd just seen the solution to an impossible problem. "We don't break the contract," Daniel said. "We honor it." "Every single word of it," Roberto looked confused. "But if we honor it, they'll just scam you like they planned." "Not if we honor it correctly," Daniel explained. "Look, every scam has a weakness. Premium Landscape's weakness is that their business model depends on clients not knowing what they're supposed to get. They rely on confusion, on clients not understanding the technical details, on being able to say this is industry standard or complications required changes. But what if the client knows exactly what they're supposed to get?" He pulled out the contract on his tablet and started pointing to specific clauses. "Look here. They've promised specific materials, specific timelines, specific quality standards. It's all in writing. They put it in writing because they never expected anyone to hold them to it. But we're going to hold them to every single word." Roberto started to understand, a slow grin spreading across his weathered face. "You're going to make them do what they actually promised." "Exactly," Daniel said. "But that's just the first part. The second part is where you come in. Roberto, you said you know every legitimate contractor in the area, right? The good ones, the honest ones." "I do," Roberto confirmed. How would you like to hire them? Daniel asked. I want to bring in a team of the best people around. Stonemasons, horticulturists, irrigation specialists, the works. I'll pay them directly fair wages and we'll work on the parts of the property that Premium Landscape's contract doesn't cover. But won't that make Premium Landscape angry? Roberto asked. Oh, absolutely, Daniel said, his smile widening. But here's the thing. There's nothing in my contract with them that says I can't make my own improvements at the same time. We're not interfering with their work. We're just doing our own work on our own property with our own money. Roberto laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. You're going to show them up. Having good workers right next to them, doing quality work while they try to cut corners. That's part of it, Daniel agreed. But there's more. I'm also going to document everything. Every single thing Premium Landscape does. Every material they use, every shortcut they try to take. I'm installing cameras all over the property, high definition with timestamps, and I'm hiring a project manager whose only job is to verify that Premium Landscape meets every single specification in the contract. The brilliance of the plan was becoming clear. Premium Landscape was used to operating in the shadows, relying on clients who didn't know any better. But Daniel was going to shine a spotlight on everything they did. They're going to hate this, Roberto said, but he was smiling. They're going to realize very quickly that I'm not the easy mark they thought I was, Daniel replied. But here's the beautiful part. They're locked into the contract too. If they walk away, they breach the contract and have to return my deposit plus damages. If they try to charge me for complications that aren't legitimate, I'll have documentation proving otherwise. They're trapped in a contract that they thought would trap me. Over the next 2 days, Daniel moved fast. He hired a project management firm that specialized in luxury estate work, paying them a premium for their immediate availability. He had a dozen high-definition cameras installed throughout the property, all feeding to a secure server. He hired Linda from the nursery as a horticultural consultant. He brought on Carlos the stonemason to oversee any stonework, and he had Roberto assemble a team of 10 of the best workers in the region. The night before Premium Landscape was scheduled to begin work, Daniel gathered his team at the manor. Roberto, the project manager, Linda, Carlos, and several others sat around the large dining room table. Tomorrow, Richard Vanderbilt and his crew are going to show up expecting to run the same scam they've run 17 times before, Daniel told them. They're expecting a young, naive billionaire who doesn't know anything about landscaping. What they're going to get instead is all of you. He laid out the full plan. Premium Landscape would work on the sections specified in their contract. Daniel's team would work on everything else. The project manager would verify every material, every measurement, every detail of Premium Landscape's work against the contract specifications. The cameras would record everything. And if Premium Landscape tried to deviate from what they'd promised, they'd be called out immediately. But what if they get aggressive? Linda asked. From what I've heard, Richard Vanderbilt doesn't like being challenged. Let him get aggressive, Daniel said calmly. Everything will be on camera. Everything will be documented. And I've got lawyers on retainer who would love nothing more than to take on a case like this. The more unreasonable Premium Landscape acts, the stronger our position becomes. Roberto raised his coffee cup in a toast to giving them exactly what they deserve. Richard Vanderbilt stepped out of his luxury car wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. He was in his mid-40s with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile that showed too many teeth. Everything about him screamed expensive, from his Italian leather shoes to his designer sunglasses. Daniel, he called out, arms spread wide as if greeting an old friend. Beautiful morning to start transforming this magnificent property, isn't it? Daniel shook his hand, keeping his expression neutral and friendly. It certainly is. I'm excited to see what you can do. Richard's crew began unloading equipment from the trucks, and that's when he noticed the other vehicles already parked on the property. Roberto's pickup, Carlos's work van, Linda's nursery truck, and several others. Richard's smile faltered for just a moment. I wasn't aware you'd have other contractors on site. That could complicate our work. Oh, don't worry, Daniel said pleasantly. They're working on different sections, areas not covered by our contract. I thought, since the property is so large, we might as well make progress on multiple fronts at once. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Daniel caught it. This wasn't part of the usual script. The clients Richard was used to dealing with sat back and let Premium Landscape have free rein. They didn't hire their own teams. They didn't stay involved, I see, Richard said slowly. Well, I suppose that's your prerogative. Though I should mention that having multiple crews working simultaneously could lead to coordination issues. That's why I hired a project manager, Daniel replied, gesturing to a woman who was approaching with a clipboard and a professional camera. Jennifer, this is Richard Vanderbilt from Premium Landscape. Richard Jennifer Hayes. She'll be overseeing all work on the property to ensure everything stays on schedule and meets specifications. Jennifer shook Richard's hand with a firm grip. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Vanderbilt, I've reviewed your contract thoroughly. Very detailed specifications. I'm looking forward to seeing them implemented. Richard's smile was now definitely strained. Of course. We pride ourselves on delivering exactly what we promise. Excellent, Jennifer said, making a note on her clipboard. I've created a checklist based on every specification in the contract. I'll be verifying materials, measurements, and quality standards at each phase. Just standard due diligence. Daniel could see the calculation happening behind Richard's eyes. This was not going according to plan. But Richard was a professional con artist, and he'd adapted to unexpected situations before. He recovered his smooth composure quickly. Wonderful, Richard said. Transparency is important. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to brief my crew on today's work. As Richard walked away, Jennifer leaned slightly toward Daniel and whispered, He's rattled. Good. Daniel smiled. The game had begun. For the first few hours, everything proceeded normally. Premium Landscape's crew began work on the main entrance area, which was part of their contract. They were supposed to install a new stone pathway using quarried granite pavers, bordered by carefully selected perennial plantings. Meanwhile, Roberto's team started work on the eastern garden, an area not covered by Premium's contract. The contrast was immediately visible. Roberto's workers moved with practiced efficiency, treating each plant with care, taking time to ensure proper soil preparation. They clearly loved what they did. Premium Landscape's crew, on the other hand, worked with the hurried carelessness of people who were just trying to get through the day. Daniel watched from a distance as they unloaded pallets of pavers. Even from 50 feet away, he could tell something was wrong. Jennifer noticed too. She walked over to examine the materials, her camera ready. She took several photos, then checked the contract specifications on her tablet. Her expression hardened. Excuse me, she called to one of Premium's workers. Who's the site supervisor? A heavy-set man with a permanent scowl walked over. That's me. Tony, what's the problem? These pavers, Jennifer said, pointing to the pallets. They're not quarried granite. They're concrete pavers with a granite finish, Tony shrugged. They look the same once they're installed. Nobody can tell the difference. I can tell the difference, Jennifer said firmly. And more importantly, the contract specifies natural quarried granite. These are not what was agreed upon. Tony's scowl deepened. Look, lady, I don't make the material decisions. I just install what I'm told to install. Then I need to speak with Mr. Vanderbilt, Jennifer said, because this is not going to pass inspection. Richard appeared within minutes, his smooth smile back in place. Jennifer, is there a problem? The pavers are concrete, not granite, Jennifer explained. The contract clearly states natural quarried granite. Richard examined the pavers with what seemed like genuine surprise, though Daniel suspected it was an act he'd performed many times before. You're absolutely right. This must be a mix-up at the supplier. Tony, get these sent back immediately and order the correct materials. But boss, we've got the whole sequence planned, Tony protested. Getting new materials will set us back 3 days. Then we'll be set back 3 days, Richard said smoothly. Mr. Chen has paid for the best, and that's what we'll deliver. He turned to Daniel with an apologetic expression. I'm terribly sorry about this. These things happen in construction, but we'll make it right. Daniel just nodded. He knew exactly what had happened. This was the first test. Premium Landscape had tried to use cheaper materials, hoping no one would notice or care. When they got caught, they played it off as an innocent mistake. The question was whether they'd actually order the correct materials or try to stall and create complications. I appreciate that, Daniel said. Jennifer will verify the materials when they arrive. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Annoyance maybe, or calculation, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Of course. As Richard walked away to presumably deal with the material issue, Roberto sidled up next to Daniel. The older man was trying not to smile. "First round goes to you," Roberto murmured. "It's going to be a long fight," Daniel replied. "He's not going to give up this easily." Roberto nodded toward Premium's crew, who were now standing around with nothing to do since they couldn't proceed without the correct materials. "Look at them. They're already frustrated. This isn't what they're used to." Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern continued. Premium Landscape would try to cut a corner, and Jennifer would catch them. They'd attempt to use cheaper plants than specified, and Linda, the horticulturist, would identify them immediately. They'd try to rush through soil preparation, and Carlos would point out that the contract specified specific soil amendments and testing. Each time they were caught, Richard would express surprise and disappointment in his suppliers or crew, promise to fix the issue and then try something else. But the delays were adding up. Premium Landscape was now almost a week behind schedule, and they hadn't even completed the entrance pathway yet. Meanwhile, Roberto's team was making incredible progress. The eastern garden was already taking shape, with carefully planned beds of perennials, a small pond with natural stone edging, and pathways that curved gracefully through the space. The quality difference was stark. Even Premium's workers would sometimes wander over during breaks to admire the work being done. Daniel noticed several of them talking quietly with Roberto and Carlos, asking questions about techniques and materials. It occurred to him that many of these workers probably weren't happy with the corner cutting either. They were just following orders from a company that cared more about profit than quality. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks into the project. Premium Landscape had finally completed the entrance pathway with the correct granite pavers, and they were moving on to the next phase, which involved installing a large fountain feature in the central courtyard. The contract specified a custom-designed fountain with natural stone basin, professional-grade pumps and filtration, and specific plantings around the perimeter. It was one of the most expensive single items in the entire contract, priced at $350,000. Daniel was in his temporary site office when Jennifer burst in, her face flushed with anger. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up photos on her tablet. The images showed the fountain materials that had just been delivered. Instead of the custom natural stone basin specified in the contract, Premium had brought in a prefabricated concrete fountain that looked like it came from a garden center. The kind of thing that might cost $10,000 retail. "Are they serious?" Daniel asked, though he wasn't really surprised. This was the big play. The fountain was expensive enough that substituting it with something cheap would save Premium Landscape a massive amount of money. "It gets worse," Jennifer said, scrolling to more photos. "The pumps are residential grade, not commercial. The filtration system is completely different from what was specified, and there are no plantings at all, just empty plastic pots." Daniel felt a cold anger settling in his chest. This wasn't just cutting corners anymore. This was outright fraud. They were trying to install something worth maybe $15,000 in place of a $350,000 custom feature. "Where's Vanderbilt?" Daniel asked. "Conveniently off-site," Jennifer replied. "Tony says he's at a no." The tension on the property was thick enough to cut with a knife. After the phone call about the fountain, Richard Vanderbilt showed up in person the next morning, and he wasn't smiling anymore. The friendly facade had cracked, revealing the calculating businessman underneath. He stood in the courtyard with his arms crossed, watching as his crew reluctantly loaded the cheap concrete fountain back onto a truck. Daniel approached, with Jennifer and Roberto flanking him like bodyguards. "I want to be very clear about something," Richard said, his voice tight. "This level of micromanagement is unprecedented. My company has completed hundreds of projects for high-net-worth clients, and we've never experienced this kind of interference." "Interference?" Daniel repeated calmly. "I call it contract enforcement. You promised specific deliverables. I'm simply ensuring I receive them." Richard's eyes flicked to Roberto, and something ugly crossed his face. "I see you've been getting advice from the help. That's unfortunate. Mr. Morales here has been spreading rumors about my company for years. Professional jealousy, I suppose." Roberto stiffened, but Daniel held up a hand. "Roberto has been nothing but honest with me, which is more than I can say for Premium Landscape Solutions. Be very careful with accusations like that," Richard warned, his voice dropping dangerously low. "My lawyers are very good at protecting the company's reputation." So are mine, Daniel replied evenly. And I have documentation of every single material substitution you've attempted. Every corner you've tried to cut. Everything you've done that violates the contract you signed. Richard's face flushed red, but he forced himself to take a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, almost reasonable. Look, Daniel, you're young, you're new to this world. Let me give you some advice. In the luxury landscaping business, there's always some flexibility in interpretation. The clients who are happiest are the ones who understand that. The clients who are happiest are the ones who get what they paid for, Daniel countered. And I paid for exactly what's written in that contract. Richard stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. You're making this much harder than it needs to be. Fine. We'll do it your way. But don't be surprised when this project takes twice as long as expected and ends up being much more complicated than necessary. As long as you deliver what was promised. I don't care how long it takes, Daniel said. Though I should remind you that the contract has completion dates with penalty clauses. After Richard left, Roberto let out a long breath. That man is furious. He's not used to being challenged. Good, Jennifer said firmly. He spent years scamming people. It's about time someone pushed back. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere on the property became increasingly hostile. Premium Landscape's crew worked with barely concealed resentment, following the contract specifications but doing so with the minimum possible effort. Meanwhile, Roberto's team continued creating beautiful work, and the contrast became more obvious every day. But Richard wasn't finished trying. He was just changing tactics. It started with the soil. Premium Landscape was supposed to amend the soil throughout their work areas, with specific organic materials and pH adjusters. The contract even specified testing before and after amendments. When Jennifer requested the soil test results, Richard produced them promptly. The numbers looked perfect. Too perfect. Daniel had the soil independently tested at 3 different locations where Premium Landscape claimed to have done amendments. The results came back showing the soil was almost unchanged from its original state. The test results Richard had provided were fabricated. When confronted, Richard claimed there must have been a mix-up with the samples, that someone must have tested the wrong areas. He promised to redo all the soil work immediately. But the pattern was clear. He was trying to document compliance while actually doing minimal work, hoping Daniel wouldn't notice until it was too late. The water feature was next. Premium had finally sourced the custom stone basin for the fountain, though it had taken them nearly 2 months. But when the installation crew arrived, Linda noticed something odd about the plantings they were preparing to install around it. These aren't the species specified in the contract, she told Daniel, showing him her comparison notes. The contract lists specific cultivars chosen for this climate and soil type. These are cheaper alternatives that look similar but won't thrive here. Another confrontation. Another excuse about supplier issues. Another grudging agreement to fix it. But Daniel was noticing something else. Every time Premium Landscape got caught and had to redo work, they were falling further behind schedule. The contract had specified completion within 6 months. They were now 4 months in and less than 40% complete. More importantly, Daniel calculated that Premium Landscape was losing money on this project. All the redone work, the correct materials they were being forced to use, the delays that kept their crew tied up instead of moving on to more profitable jobs. This was becoming expensive for them. That's when Richard tried his biggest move yet. Daniel was reviewing the week's progress photos when his phone rang. It was his lawyer. You need to hear this, his lawyer said. Premium Landscape just sent us a letter. They're claiming the project has encountered massive unforeseen complications, and they need an additional $750,000 to complete the work. Daniel felt his blood pressure rising. On what grounds? They're citing a clause in the contract about unforeseen site conditions, the lawyer explained. They claim the drainage is worse than initial surveys indicated, that there's contaminated soil in several areas that need special handling, and that the water table is higher than expected, requiring additional engineering for the fountain. That's complete nonsense, Daniel said. We've been documenting everything. The site conditions are exactly as surveyed. I know, his lawyer replied, and I've already prepared a response. But Daniel, this is their nuclear option. They're trying to force you into either paying up or engaging in expensive litigation. Most of their previous clients chose to just pay. Daniel smiled grimly. Then most of their previous clients didn't have video documentation of every square foot of this property. He called an emergency meeting with his entire team. Roberto, Jennifer, Linda, Carlos, and his lawyer all gathered in the site office. Daniel projected the letter from Premium Landscape onto the wall. "They want $750,000 for complications that don't exist," he said. "Here's how we respond." Jennifer pulled up her comprehensive documentation. She had photos with timestamps showing the soil conditions throughout the property. She had the independent soil tests proving there was no contamination. She had survey data showing the water table was exactly as originally measured. "We're going to respond point by point," Daniel explained. "Every single claim they make, we're going to refute with documentation. Photos, test results, expert analysis, and we're going to make it clear that if they want to pursue this, we'll see them in court, where all of this documentation becomes public record." His lawyer nodded approvingly. "That's the right approach. Richard Vanderbilt doesn't want this going public. His business model depends on these settlements staying confidential." The response was delivered the next day. It was 37 pages long with over 100 supporting documents attached. Daniel made sure to copy several industry publications and the local business journal on the response, just to make sure Richard understood the stakes. Richard showed up at the property that afternoon, and for the first time since this whole situation began, he looked worried. "That response was unnecessarily aggressive," he said to Daniel. "It was thoroughly documented," Daniel replied, "which is what matters in court." Richard's jaw worked. "Look, maybe we can work something out. Perhaps some of my crew's assessments were overstated. We could probably reduce that additional cost significantly." "To zero?" Daniel asked. "Be reasonable," Richard said, his voice taking on a pleading quality that seemed foreign to him. "We've been working on this project for 4 months. We've had to redo work multiple times because of your excessive quality demands. We're barely breaking even here." "That's not my problem," Daniel said flatly. "You signed a contract. You agreed to specific deliverables at a specific price. The fact that you based your business model on cutting corners and overcharging doesn't create an obligation on my part to subsidize your poor planning." Richard's face cycled through several emotions before settling on cold resignation. "Fine. We'll withdraw the additional cost claim. But I want it on record that this project has been the most difficult and unprofitable job my company has ever undertaken." "Feel free to put that in writing," Daniel said. "I'll frame it." After Richard left, Roberto started laughing. It was a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to come from years of pent-up frustration finally being released. "Did you see his face?" Roberto said, wiping his eyes. "He finally realized he's not going to win this one." "He's not done fighting," Jennifer cautioned. "A cornered rat is dangerous," she was right. Over the next few weeks, Premium Landscape's tactics became increasingly petty. They'd start work late. They'd take extended breaks. Their crew would find endless minor issues that needed addressing. They were clearly trying to stretch the project out, maybe hoping that Daniel would. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Premium Landscape Solutions finally completed their contracted work at Riverside Manor. It had taken them 9 months total, 3 months longer than the contract specified. Every single specification had been met, verified, and documented. The work was done correctly, but it was clear that the company had barely broken even on the project. Richard Vanderbilt stood in the driveway, holding the final completion documents for Daniel to sign. He looked older than he had 9 months ago. The smooth confidence that had been his trademark was gone, replaced by barely concealed exhaustion and resentment. "The work is complete," Richard said stiffly. "Everything matches the contract specifications. I trust you'll find it satisfactory." Daniel walked through the completed areas one final time with Jennifer. The entrance pathway with its genuine granite pavers, the custom fountain with its natural stone basin and professional-grade systems, the carefully amended soil supporting the exact plant cultivars specified in the contract. It was all there exactly as promised. "It's acceptable," Daniel said simply. Richard's jaw tightened at the word acceptable, but he said nothing. Daniel signed the completion documents, and just like that, Premium Landscape Solutions was done. No additional fees, no last-minute charges, just the contracted amount which, after all the redone work and correct materials, had left the company with almost no profit. As Richard's trucks pulled away from Riverside Manor for the last time, Roberto stood next to Daniel watching them go. "You did it," Roberto said quietly. You beat them at their own game. We did it, Daniel corrected. None of this would have been possible without you. The property was transformed. Between Premium Landscape's contracted work and Roberto's team's efforts on the remaining areas, Riverside Manor had been restored to a beauty that exceeded even the original historical gardens. The difference in quality between the two sections was stark. Premium's areas were correct and met specifications, but they lacked soul. Roberto's sections were works of art, created with love and expertise. But Daniel knew the real victory wasn't just about the gardens. Word had spread throughout the region about what had happened. The young billionaire who'd held Premium Landscape accountable, the complete documentation that proved their scam tactics, the workers who'd quit rather than continue being part of a dishonest operation. 2 weeks after Premium Landscape left, Daniel received a call from Victoria Ashford again. "I thought you should know," she said, and he could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Richard Vanderbilt is in serious trouble. 6 former clients, myself included, have gotten together. We've hired a law firm and we're filing a class action lawsuit against Premium Landscape. Your documentation gave us the courage to speak up. The NDAs they made us sign were meant to protect them from exactly this kind of exposure. I'm glad I could help," Daniel said. "There's more," Victoria continued. "The local business journal is running a full investigation into Premium Landscape's business practices. Several industry publications are picking up the story. Richard's reputation is destroyed. His company is bleeding clients." Over the following months, Daniel watched as Premium Landscape Solutions collapsed. The class action lawsuit revealed years of systematic fraud. Richard Vanderbilt tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The company filed for bankruptcy within 8 months of completing work at Riverside Manor, but Daniel's attention had already moved to something more important. One evening, he and Roberto sat in the restored gardens watching the sun set over the property. The fountain bubbled peacefully. The carefully chosen plants were thriving. It was everything Daniel had envisioned when he first bought the property. "I've been thinking," Daniel said. "What happened with Premium Landscape? It's not just about one bad company. It's about a whole system that allows companies like that to exist. Wealthy people get taken advantage of because they don't know who to trust. Good workers like you and your team don't get the recognition and pay you deserve because companies like Premium take most of the money and give you scraps." Roberto nodded slowly. "That's been the way of things for a long time. What if we changed it?" Daniel asked. "What if we created something different? A company that connects property owners directly with skilled workers. Fair prices, transparent practices, quality work. No middleman taking huge cuts and cutting corners?" Roberto turned to look at him, interest sparking in his eyes. "That's a big undertaking. I've got the resources to fund it," Daniel said. "But I'd need someone to run it. Someone who knows every good worker in the region. Someone who understands quality and has the respect of the people who actually do the work." He paused. "Someone like you." Roberto was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel wondered if he'd overstepped. Then the older man smiled, the first truly relaxed smile Daniel had seen from him. "You're offering me a partnership?" Roberto asked. "I'm offering you a chance to build something that matters," Daniel replied. "Something that treats workers fairly and gives clients honest service. Something that proves business doesn't have to be about scamming people." Roberto stood up and extended his hand. "Then I accept." They called it Riverside Landscape Cooperative. The model was simple but revolutionary in the luxury landscaping world. Property owners would pay fair prices for quality work. The workers would receive fair wages, no undercutting. The cooperative would take a modest percentage to cover coordination and management, but the bulk of the money would go to the people actually doing the work. Roberto recruited carefully, bringing in the best workers he knew. Carlos the stonemason, Linda from the nursery, Kevin and the other former Premium Landscape workers. People who took pride in their craft and had been waiting for an opportunity like this. The cooperative's first official project, aside from maintaining Riverside Manor, came from Victoria Ashford. She wanted her gardens completely redone, properly this time. More clients followed. Word spread about the quality of work and the honest business practices. Within 6 months, Riverside Landscape Cooperative had a waiting list. Within a year, they had 3 full crews working across the region. The workers earned more than they ever had working for companies like Premium Landscape. The clients got better work for fair prices. And Daniel's investment, while not motivated by profit, was returning better than many of his tech ventures. But the real satisfaction came from the impact. Other workers in the region started forming similar cooperatives, inspired by Roberto's success. The old exploitative model that companies like Premium Landscape had perfected was becoming obsolete. It turned out that when you treated workers with respect and charged clients honestly, everyone won. 2 years after that first morning when Roberto had warned him about Premium Landscape, Daniel stood in the gardens of Riverside Manor at an evening celebration. The property had been featured in 3 major design magazines. Landscape architecture students visited to study Roberto's work. And tonight they were celebrating the cooperative's expansion to 3 neighboring states. Roberto found Daniel standing by the fountain, looking content in a way he rarely seemed in his tech billionaire days. "Penny for your thoughts?" Roberto asked. "I was just thinking about how lucky I was," Daniel said, "that you had the courage to warn me about Premium Landscape. If you hadn't, I'd have been just another Mark. Another wealthy fool who got scammed and was too embarrassed to do anything about it. You would have figured it out eventually," Roberto said. "You're too smart not to." "Maybe," Daniel acknowledged. "But I wouldn't have met you. Wouldn't have learned about this whole world that I knew nothing about. Wouldn't have built something that actually matters." Roberto smiled. "You know what the best part is? Richard Vanderbilt spent years building a company based on taking advantage of people. He made millions doing it, but in the end, all it took was one person who refused to be taken advantage of, and the whole thing collapsed. Sometimes the system isn't as strong as it seems." Daniel raised his glass. "To new systems, then. Better ones." "To better systems," Roberto agreed, clinking his glass against Daniel's. Around them, the gardens of Riverside Manor glowed in the evening light. Workers from the cooperative mingled with clients, with industry professionals, with students learning the trade. Kevin was explaining irrigation systems to a group of young apprentices. Linda was discussing native plant species with a client. Carlos was showing his stonework to an admiring crowd. The fountain that had been at the center of so much conflict now served as a gathering point, its waters reflecting the lights strung through the trees. It was everything it was supposed to be, built correctly because someone had insisted on it being built correctly. A journalist from the design magazine approached Daniel. "Mr. Chen, I'm doing a follow-up article about the cooperative. Can I ask, what made you decide to take on Premium Landscape the way you did? Most people in your position would have just paid the extra fees and moved on." Daniel thought about it for a moment. "I think it's because I remembered something from when I was starting my first company. I was young, I didn't have money or connections, and a lot of people tried to take advantage of that. I promised myself that if I ever had the power to push back against that kind of thing, I would. Premium Landscape was just the first time I had the reso,